This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Matt Van Italie on the show. He is the founder and CEO of Sema Software, which is a company that I guess it's software that inspects software to make sure the software's correct and whatever other things.
Well said. Very well said. Yeah.
Anyway, with all that being said, Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got into to software in general and why you decided to found Sema.
Yeah, for sure. So a long time ago, I was the son of a math teacher and a computer programmer. And now what I do for a living, what Sema does, is it treats code as data. So kind of feel like I was in the womb getting ready for this job. But turned out I did many things, different things along the way. I was a data and analytics executive, but not a coder. And about 10 years ago, I just observed it just seemed really hard to understand, non-technical executives to understand what was coming out of the engineering function. Really, really smart CTOs doing great work, but really a lot harder to understand than some of the other departments like sales or marketing and such. And part of that is, of course, it's a much harder problem. It is more nuanced in certain regards. And so Sema, we founded it to really bridge the gap, to translate between the tech world and the non-tech world so that teams could build better products together.
Awesome. And with all the things that are coming out, like one of the things that I was reading about when I was researching, Sema, is how you guys inspect for software written by or code written by generative AI, and that's one of the tools that a lot of developers are starting to use with Copilot and other systems out there to kind of write code for them to help them advance quicker and quicker and quicker. What are some of the risks that are involved in that?
Yeah. So there's four risks, and I should say that we're huge fans of using Gen AI to code. Absolutely, pound the table for it. But folks need to go into it with their eyes open. One of those risks is exactly. So one of those risks is code security. So Gen AI code can introduce security warnings. By the way, so can human code, so can using open source code. But the code really needs to be checked to make sure that the security risks are taken care of. A second is maintainability risk or quality risk. And just like anything, if a computer does it, it may or may not be right. And so you really need to check it for context, for accuracy, for maintainability, understandability, etc. A third, in some very limited circumstances, I people shouldn't freak out about this, but certain circumstances, generative AI products will not get copyright protection. So some of the big companies are starting to worry about how to get the copyright protection of their code because they have been seeking it over time, and the Copyright Office has said, well, if Gen AI has written it, it's if Gen AI has written it, you can't copyright that. So that's just for the biggest organizations.
And I've seen some about that with, they're doing they're trying to figure out a percentage, like if a certain percentage was human generated versus AI generated, they might be able to copyright that.
Exactly. And so then the question is just how much, and we think companies who are getting copyright protection, seek copyright protection for their code. I really would talk to your lawyers about how to make sure you're staying in compliance.
Yeah.
Almost certainly you're going to need to start measuring it. Whatever the percentage that the Copyright Office says, you're going to need to show, if you're in target, in range or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the third reason. And the final one is also somewhat specific, which is investors and acquirers of software companies are beginning to look at the Gen AI code composition percentage. And in certain circumstances, if there's too much Gen AI, not a lot yet, but it's growing, they just won't buy the company. So if
Hmm.
you think about, you ask someone to write you, let's say, a term paper in school. That's a bad example. You shouldn't do that. But let's just say you did, and they hand it over to you, and you ask them, how'd you build it? And you said, well, I put it into an LLM, and it just a prompt wrote it. Well, you say, well, I could just do that myself. And so we're now starting seeing the beginning of companies that small number of companies that are extremely almost exclusively written by Gen AI, investors deciding that they can acquire can just build it themselves instead.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that. And I saw that this new term called vibe coding, where it's basically just prompt generating to write software. And I think that's a good skill to have. And I teach part time at Winthrop University in computer science, and I'm probably one of the few professors at the school that actually encourages my students to use AI to do their tools, or to submit their papers and things like that, because I think it's a good skill to have. But there again, if it's all 100% and not checked, not validated, not proof, not, gone through this risk that you just mentioned, then what value is there? I
Yeah.
can
Have you
definitely
seen
see how investors can take a step back and say, well, with good prompt engineering, I can just do this exact same thing.
exactly right. Have you seen Inception, the Christopher Nolan movie?
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Yeah, I love this. Is to me is one of my favorite analogies of vibe coding, where there's those it's like all Christopher Nolan movies, very complicated, great actors. But there's these folks who can build worlds and they design them, and these incredibly intricate worlds just unfold in front of them. And I feel like that just feels to me like what vibe coding is like. You can think of an idea, you express it in English, and then this world, in this case, this code is created. Difference one is it's not just limited to a small number of really specialized people. Now everybody can do it. So if everybody can vibe code, um, then if everybody can vibe code, then there's less value for the specialists involved. But I also think, and we're seeing this with the rise of vibe coding, it's just incredibly hard to edit. Like just think about not literally hard, but emotionally hard. Because if you just see this fully complete, looks right, like everything's put together, it's just hard to like get the mental energy to work through it in a way that, if someone puts a world in front of you, are you going to like check to make sure every door opens, etc. So it really requires a different mindset to be able to check it, which different from, the traditional code reviews of a few, lines here and functions there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I actually was playing around with something not too long ago, and I had I was using prompts to try to generate a WordPress plugin that I was just playing around with it,
Yep.
and
Yep.
it generated it, and it actually worked. However, when I went back to look through the code, I didn't quite understand it, and it wasn't written in a way that I've seen any other WordPress plugins written. And it was just like, well, I can't follow this. Like, and
Mhm.
it was very frustrating, and I ended up just not using it at all because although it worked and it achieved the goal that I wanted it to achieve, I knew the maintainability wasn't there. And I figured there's probably a lot of security holes in there as well, especially with it being WordPress. But just the inability to actually see what's there and understand it, I didn't feel like it wasn't worth my time to take the time to go read through it and figure it out.
Yeah, and everyone listening, that is exactly how you should view these Gen AI tools. As amazing as they are, I mean, they're spectacular for prototyping.
Hmm.
Spectacular, right? You can try a whole bunch of different ideas out and see how they work. But if the code really matters, enterprise situations, you gotta be able to know how it works. You got to make sure it's correct, it's maintainable, etc. And certainly there's a higher percentage of situations in prototyping where Gen AI coding tools are applicable than enterprise grade code. So just do exactly as John said and be careful. Be careful with the output of these tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're talking about, when you look at using a tool like, Grok or ChatGPT or any of the or Copilot that will generate like good user interfaces. I think that's a great use case, especially when you're looking at creating an MVP or something like that for a new product or prototyping,
Exactly.
like you mentioned. It works fantastic for things like that. How is it that SEMA gets involved when it comes to looking at code?
Yeah, so we got started as technical due diligence advisors, which is to say, if a company is thinking about buying another company that has made software, we're asked to look under the hood and understand the non-functional requirements like code quality, like code security, etc. We've since expanded from the earlier stage of just diligence to helping companies stay healthy and be ready for exit and so forth. But it all started with the diligence use case. And so it turns out several of our clients said, well, you've checked for open source risk historically. Now please start checking for Gen AI code risk, which is very analogous. Gen AI code wasn't written by the coders; it was prompted by the coders. Similarly, open source wasn't written by um, the coders; it was written by a community, members of the community. It's a really good idea to be using open source, and similarly, under the right circumstances, it's a really good idea to be using um, Gen AI tools. But it comes with risks, security risks, IP risks, exactly like we said. And so there was just a natural extension from looking at code composition about open source to extend it to looking at code for Gen AI.
Hmm. Yeah. So, how is it that you would go about actually detecting that this code was not written by a human versus, generated? Because, although like for me, I can look and tell that I didn't write it, but I don't know if one of my other developers didn't write it or not, you know?
Yeah. So huge kudos to our amazing research team. Um, there is we have a deep learning model that's trained on Gen AI code versus not Gen AI code with a lot of data science to figure out some of the nuances because tools like that can get caught up in the difference between auto-generated code and Gen AI generated code, like scaffolding stuff that comes out of
Ah, yes.
a framework. It's really hard to tell the difference between those two. But again, all thanks for researchers. Very pleased that we have a reasonable estimation level.
Mm. And, how do you go about building up a database like that? Like, how do you build up that deep learning model and
Yeah, this hard and thoughtful work, but certainly building the training sets, the Gen AI code we generated ourselves, so it was automatically produced, and we could be sure it was Gen AI generated. And the not generated code we used open source as the comparison set.
oh yeah, so that makes sense. So and I'm assuming that over time you can, that'll just continue to grow as, open source libraries grow and, you create more and more models.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So and every time there's like a new update, like, with a new version of ChatGPT or um XAI or whatever tools out there that you guys are using, or other people are using, do you see that changes your model a little bit, or how is that like? Is their codes becoming more human
Right now,
like or not?
there's so much more in common than they are different right now. And the real thing that's going on is that nobody's, in almost all circumstances, the perceived risk of Gen AI code versus human code is low. So nobody's trying to hide their work. So
Mhm.
contrast in academic settings where folks are you know write me a paper but write it as an 11th grader with a bunch of mistakes in it, right? Where folks are intentionally trying to hide the difference. Um, Thankfully, that we're not at that stage yet for code, and also code leaves behind more of a footprint or a thumbprint, if you will, um, of the signal from Gen AI. If you just folks who are listening to version control systems, and you think of how detailed the data is and the metadata associated with commits, compare that to writing an essay in ChatGPT, copy and pasting it in, changing it to Times New Roman and font size 12. There's a lot less metadata associated with human writing coming out of Gen AI tools, which is why it is possible to detect Gen AI versus not Gen AI code, and much, much harder, if possible at all, to detect Gen AI versus not Gen AI human writing.
Ah, that makes sense. I haven't really thought about it that way. Um, do you see like these models, they're like these AI tools becoming more and more human like when it comes to their writing, or drifting even further away with
Yeah, I think until there are stakes, significant stakes for coders, I think it will be just efficient code. But when there are stakes for coders, then they will ask it to write more like humans to make it seem more similar.
Gotcha. And yeah, I assume that yeah, that's obviously coming. But um, are you seeing like partnerships with some of these um, generative AI companies to almost put something in their code that will help identify it even more?
Yeah, those are the ideas of watermarks. Companies are already experimenting with that. Um, I think the world is, we'll see. This is probably the honest answer. We'll see. It is, the good news, I guess, if you're in the Gen AI code transparency business like we are, is there are some advanced methods that are extremely difficult to obfuscate. We had to do it a particular way to get started to help in diligences and other kinds of situations where we're showing up and just looking at the code. But when you open the aperture and have more streams of information to look at, it's possible to be accurate without having to resort to predicting based on the code itself.
Yeah. Okay. I understand that. Um, so let's shift gears just a little bit and tell me a little bit about your team, your company, and kind of what's the future going to be like for SEMA.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, honored to work with folks around the U.S. and around the globe. Um, we're a remote first team and honored to have found some really just spectacular folks across research and engineering and product and delivery and operations. What we're working on now is taking everything we've learned from building these one-off reports. So, you know, a Carfax or a credit score, things, those kind of analogies, and building a continuous SaaS product based on it. It's been a ton of fun and really, really excited um, really excited about what's coming next.
Okay, cool. Um, when you're like building a company like this and starting out, what was it like? Like, what was the um your emotional state when it comes to like starting a startup and moving into a space like this?
Yeah, it was a real itch that I needed to scratch. It drove me crazy that we couldn't just, how can non-technical executives understand what technical executives are saying? It just seemed too important a problem. If you like, if software is eating the world, if the folks creating the software and the folks funding, the finance team and others can't understand it, there's just um, such disconnect between those teams, and then as a result, there's value left on the table. That value for the company, value for the users, just seemed like an incredibly important problem to solve. And so, honestly, I was just really, really interested in figuring out a way that we could do it. This is the time where I give the generic advice. Starting business is incredibly hard. Um, there's a selection bias that you only hear from folks who make it, and almost every business doesn't make it. So you got to go into it being able to afford it being a complete disaster, number one, and it won't work. And number two, that there's success in the process, that you will have learned something, that you will have figured out if being in startups is right for you. If the only thing you want to do is, for example, maximize your income or even maximize your impact, you're much better off with an organization that's further along where your percentage of the solution might be smaller for you, but the expected value is much higher as a function of the likelihood of success. That said, I'm incredibly glad I did it. I feel so lucky for the chance to have done this. Um, I don't think I'll start a second. I don't really need to. But I this was such an important idea, and I'm really glad I started with it. But at the end of the day, I like working with an existing team and helping them do great work, which I'm incredibly fortunate I get to do today.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I know like doing a whole startup was I did that, many years ago and you know, ran it for about 7 years before selling and moving on. Um, a lot of fun, really glad I did it. Don't think I'll do it again.
Exactly, exactly.
Um, so what do you see as the next thing that you guys will be focusing on? Because like you mentioned kind of in passing that there was a shift between more of open source due diligence to Gen AI due diligence. What is the next thing that we need to be paying attention to?
Yeah, well, one of the things I'm really, really excited about, as you can see, I'm I'm excitable. I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't excitable. Is um, we're using some AI techniques, not because they're sexy, but they actually are fit for purpose to help understand the product roadmap. And, for a long time, we've done non-functional requirements, the quality, the security, the health of the code base. And we're now expanding into functional requirements. What is the product roadmap and is it on track? If it's not on track, how do we make it on track? And that is a blast to build and a blast to be able to be useful. We're dog fooding it ourselves right now, and it is so cool and so helpful to just know a different set of eyes on the code and the product plans to make sure we're heading in the right direction.
So how would you determine whether it's on track or not? How would an AI model be able to do that?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a story. About a year ago, I got the idea for this reading some journal articles about um, AI looking at annual financial statements from companies, financial reports, and using that to pick stocks and picking stocks accurately. And I thought, well, interesting. Annual reports are structured data, but they're differently structured. Each of those annual reports does it a little bit differently. So, you know what else is structured but differently structured? Product management data like Jira and
Mhm.
code. It's structured, but it's differently structured. And so, our amazing and unstoppable research team has been spent the last year plus building ways to use AI to think about completion dates and percentage on track and risks. That it's pretty magic. It's pretty magic. Maybe I'll leave it like that.
Man, I wish I could use some of the AI tools to fix my portfolio. I looked at it this morning and stocks are just continuing to go out.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh when it comes to like roadmap data, and understanding you're on track, would this be something that you guys would want to like not just use internally, but potentially sell as a service?
Almost certainly, yes. Yes. So this is a SaaS product. It's underway. If you want to hear about it, listeners, and you want to be in the very select MVP class, just give us a ring. Wink. John's gonna let me share how to get in touch with us. But yeah, we're definitely building it. We're getting it right for ourselves and letting a small group of pilot users use it. But it's going to be released as part of a SaaS product in the future.
Do you think it's going to be like this year, like Q4 or early next year?
Oh yeah, no, definitely this year.
Definitely this year.
Definitely this year.
So getting
Yep.
close, huh?
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely want to hear more about that. Maybe you can come back on the show after that comes out and talk a little bit more in detail about how that's going and what the future is of that product because that sounds like a very interesting niche that I haven't heard much about. And I've interviewed a lot of people on AI and nobody's talked about road mapping. So,
Yeah.
uh, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little about how they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about this and maybe join that MVP group and connect with you online.
Absolutely. So, again, John, thank you so much for having me. It was just such a blast.
Mhm.
You guys can find me at on LinkedIn. I'm at MVI, Matt Van Idley. I'm also at semasoftware.com. If you click to get in touch, we'll make sure that the team gets that information to me.
Awesome. And I'll link those to you both in the show notes at geekleader.com so people can go there and click through and find out more about the things they're doing at SEMA and maybe jump in and be a part of that MVP program with the roadmaps. Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate having you on.
John, this was awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.